Hello everybody, I'm Den Haring and welcome back to my channel, Fish Den 365. Today we're going to be talking about walk-in fishing. Everything you need to know when you're going to take that walk to get to your fishing destination, fishing from shore. Okay, so the situation for me a few weeks back was that I didn't have my tow vehicle. My wife was using it to go to the shore with her and some friends. And so I had the weekend to myself and decided to go to Possum Lodge, which is a little trailer that we have up in Pike County. And there was a pond in the northeastern corner of Pike County that I haven't been to in about 5 years or so. And it's a walk-in deal. It's about a mile and a half walk. It's very wild. There's not a lot of things around. It's mostly woods. There's bears, there's snakes. You have to be careful when you're doing some of these types of things, because if you're on your own, you know, one of the things that you can do is have a cell phone with you, assuming you have cell coverage in the place that you're walking to. That way, if something happens, you can make a phone call and get yourself out of trouble. Because you never know. The last time I was at this place, there was a rattlesnake on the dam. I saw him, so I just avoided him. But I'll give you another example. That we were at a different pond that we walked into. This was my wife and my daughter and my son and I. This was a few years back. And there was a spillway with a little bridge and some riprap around it. And my wife decided to sit down on a rock there when we got there. And she heard this rattling noise, and here underneath that rock, right under where she sat down, there was like a little gap in it. There was a rattlesnake, and that's what the rattling was. So when we heard it, I realized she didn't even know what it was. She didn't know if it was some kind of cicada or whatever, and I realized what it was, and I said, just get up real slowly and walk toward me, and she did, and then we saw under there, and it was a very large-sized rattlesnake. So you got to be careful. You never know what you might run into, so it's good to have a cell phone. It's good to have some other things to protect yourself in case you get yourself into some trouble, and that could mean a can of mace or even a firearm, a pistol or something like that. For what I was doing this particular day, I didn't feel that was necessary. The danger I ran into on this day were thunderstorms. I actually got chased off the place by some thunderstorms, but I think that ended up being a good thing, because while I was at this pond, I found that the fish seemed to be rather stunted. I could not catch a bass bigger than 12 inches. And the last fish I caught, which was on a horny toad, it was maybe 12 inches max, but it was starving. You could see that it hadn't eaten for a while, and all the bass looked like this that I caught in the pond that day. So I think the pond has taken a turn for the worse, and I did not even see a bluegill. And I looked. Usually you can find little bluegills and stuff. I don't know if there's any bluegill in the pond. I think the bass are just eating each other. And it's a shame. It's a 44-acre pond. It's good sized. The deal is that this particular pond, my understanding is that it was owned by some drug dealers, and they got caught dealing drugs, and they ended up losing the land. The Game Commission ended up getting the land, and then they just made it open for hunting and fishing. So you can walk there and go hunting and fishing. It's a real beautiful place. There's a dock on the pond, and it's just really pretty in that area. Lots of wildlife, but the fishing for me was not so good, and I kind of got the sensation that there might be a few big fish in there, but there isn't many. They were stunted, and so I ended up calling an audible as a storm was approaching. I got out of there and got into my car, and I just went to some of the local public lakes and fished from shore. I just went lake hopping, basically, and fishing from boat launches and from areas that I could access from the shore using a horny toad, and I was able to salvage the day with a couple of decent bass, some nice fish. So let's talk about when you're doing one of these walk-ins, how you approach this, right? Because you want to have some rods and reels and some different options for what you're going to be fishing on that particular day. So on this day I took 3 rods, and usually that's what I'll do. I'll take 2 or 3 rods depending on how well I know the place that I'm fishing, and they're rigged with different baits, obviously. So one of the things that I almost always take when I'm pond fishing is we'll talk about the soft plastic stuff first, because usually that's what ends up being the most productive. I'll never go to a pond without taking this. This is a Zoom horny toad. or a lake, doesn't matter. This thing is one of the best topwater baits I've ever used, and it's just extremely versatile. You can throw it through some heavy cover, you can throw it in open water. This is a green pumpkin horny toad. I like to dip the tails in dye. I have a bottle of chartreuse dye here. I just dip it in just so that the tails have that chartreuse color to them. It mimics the tail and fins of a bluegill. And so the other thing I do with this, and I have a whole video on fishing toads and the horny toad. I'll put it up here for you to take a look at if you have an interest. I usually take a knife, and you can see this toad has a slot in it for the hook. The hook comes up through the back. But I always take a knife and I actually slice through the entire bait. Hopefully you can see that hole there right through. You can probably see me right through the hole. And the reason why I do that is just so that this is a pretty thick plastic. And so I want my hook to get through there when it's time for me to set the hook. And I've just found that by putting that slice in there like that, I get a much better hookup percentage. In fact, I get a very good hookup percentage. Generally what I'm using is an extra wide gap hook, 5/0. And it's the type with a screw eye. You just screw it into the nose of the bait, come out the back, and then I usually will bury the tip of the point in one of these two little ridges on the back of the bait, and I just throw it out and fish it that way. And you can see on the videos here that caught some decent fish on it right from the bank that particular day. After that storm chased me off, it stayed cloudy and overcast. That's a really good time to fish this bait when you have those overcast, humid days. The fish come up. There's usually a good topwater bite, and there was on the couple of lakes that I ended up going to on that particular day to throw the Zoom horny toad. One of the other baits that I always take with me on a pond trip is a Zoom fluke. So, which is a soft plastic jerk bait, and the way I fish the Zoom fluke is I take a little screw eye and I screw the eye of that hook. I screw the eye of the screw eye into the nose of the bait, and then I take a small hook like this and I go right through the nose of the screw eye. This one's actually been a little boogered up here. Let me just turn it so that it's right. And then I'll put a little keeper on here so that it doesn't come off so easily, and I can just fish my fluke that way. Now if I'm fishing for smallmouth and the bait is small, I'll fish a small size fluke like this one. When I fish largemouth, I always fish the larger size fluke. It just depends on the bait and the species that I'm fishing for. And then this same rig, this same spinning rod can then be used, and this hook even can then be used to throw something else. I like the fluke because I can fish it pretty fast. I can cover some water with it. I can throw it out there and kind of jerk it along and keep it along on the surface and fish it top water. I can slow it down if I want, fish it subsurface. But when I need to go real slow, because sometimes they'll really chase that fluke and they really want it. Other days you can't really get bit on it. And so when I can't get bit on it, that's when I turn to a Senko style bait like this. And I like to fish it wacky rigged, which is putting the hook right in the middle of the bait. I usually put an O-ring on the Senko right to the middle of the bait, and then I'll put that hook right through the O-ring so that I have it fished wacky style. And I could just use this very same hook. I just pull it off this bait, put it on my Senko. Everything is fast and efficient. I don't have to be messing around with a different rod or changing baits or changing hooks or retying or anything like that. So with this one setup, I can fish a fluke fast or a wacky rig Senko slow. Both are killers at walk-in destinations, walk-in lakes and walk-in ponds. They are both very good presentations to be throwing out there. So, on this particular day, that's what I took for my soft plastics. It was a fluke, a Senko, and a Zoom horny toad. And if I wasn't going to catch any on those, I wasn't going to catch any because that's the only thing I brought. I had a little backpack, I had a little box. I had some of these bags of these different baits, and that's what I threw on that particular day. And that's what I usually do when I do a walk-in fishing trip. I usually take some hard baits though too. So I'll take a bait casting rod, and one of the things I always like to take on these walk-in trips is a square bill crankbait like this one. It doesn't go down too deep, but it can get down over some submerged weed beds. It can be fished around wood really easy and really well. very efficiently. I usually like a bluegill pattern because most of the ponds and the walking destinations I'm fishing are bluegill lakes as far as what the fish are feeding on, or perch, and this can imitate either one of those. So squarebill is always one of the baits I'll take along with me. The other bait that I like to take is a lipless crankbait. This is a rattle trap, a Bill Lewis rattle trap. This is another key bait, especially if you have some of that submergent vegetation. You can throw it out there and just rip it through the vegetation. Sometimes it'll get hung up in there and you pop it free. The bait comes out, goes back down, and that's when they'll grab it. Another very effective bait for walk-in destinations. And then, of course, you don't ever go to a walk-in destination without some topwaters. I usually like a popper, something like this, to fish slowly on the surface. If I want to fish a little, if I want to fish a little faster, I'll use a walking bait like this Strike King Sexy Dog, I believe it's called. And then lastly, I like to throw early morning and then later in the evening, especially on ponds and some of these smaller lakes. I'll choose a smaller size whopper plopper and cover some water. And usually during the low light conditions, you can get bit on this pretty well. The only other bait that I might take with me on these types of walk-in destinations, it depends on the time of the year. I may take a swim bait or a swim jig. Usually that's earlier in the year and later in the year, spring and fall. Those are two baits that I like to use. And then also a soft plastic bait, a creature bait, for example, that I'll fish Texas rig with maybe 1/4 to 3/8 ounce weight. So might be something like a Reaction Innovations beaver or a Zoom brush hog. Those are two baits that I'll throw often as well. But in the middle of summer, the way the situation was for this pond, and I knew a little bit about it because I was there 5 years ago, I didn't even feel that I needed that. I just felt that I needed the Senko, I needed the fluke, and then some of the hard baits. The Senko I figured would be the one that catches the fish if they were being difficult to catch. And then, of course, I had the Zoom horny toad as well. So generally when I'm walking in, I usually will have a pair of boots on, maybe boots up to my knee, like knee boots, or even hip boots, depending if I'm going to be wading further in or not. On this particular day, I just use knee boots. Again, you just need to be aware when you're walking of what you're walking through and over. You want to be able to see where you can walk. Sometimes a walking stick might help. But for me, I was carrying 3 rods. I had my camera and I had a backpack with some of these fishing items in. I just made sure that where I was walking, I could see, so that I wasn't going to be stepping on a snake inadvertently or something like that. A couple of other things to consider when you're doing a walk-in trip like this is you definitely want to make sure you have some water with you. Don't want to get dehydrated out there, especially during the summer months. But that can happen any time of year, so make sure you have some water. If you get stuck, you'll have something that can help you survive. Not a bad idea to have some food, like granola bars, something that has some good caloric content to it so that you can keep your energy up. And then lastly, you want to be able to guard yourself against ticks and sunlight, right? If you're out in the middle of the day, the sun could be damaging to your skin, so you want to do something to guard against that. Maybe have the proper clothing to protect you. And then when it comes to ticks, you can use clothing or even some type of spray to help repel them. But either way, when you do get home or back from your trip, it's always a good idea to check yourself for ticks, especially these little deer ticks. They're the ones that carry Lyme disease, and that could be a devastating disease if you don't catch it early. The nice thing about these walk-in places is it's usually a nice nature experience. There's not a lot of people around. Sometimes you can spend the entire day and not see a person, which is always, for me, I like that. I like to be out in solitude in nature, and to me that's it's refreshing for the soul, so to speak. So that's basically the whole deal when it comes to doing these walk-in destination fishing trips. If you haven't done it, I'd suggest to do a little homework, find a place that might be a little out of the way. You can use some maps. You can use Google Maps to do this. There's a lot of tools out there that you can utilize to find these kind of places. Get out there and do a little walk-in trip and get some exercise and get some nice fishing in too. A lot of these places don't get hit very hard, so the fish are easier to catch. They're not pressured like some of the main lakes might be. And so it's always fun to have an adventure. And you never know what you're going to find, especially at new places. It's always a bit of an adventure. Sometimes it's a bust, sometimes you get a pleasant surprise, but you don't know until you venture out there and give it a try. I hope you found the video helpful. If you did, hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. When you do, hit that bell. That'll give you a notification for when the next video is coming out. Remember, this channel is all about the art and science of fishing, especially bass fishing. We've got a ton of informational videos to help make you a better fisherman, to help you make you more successful when you're out there catching fish and pursuing this great pastime we call fishing. Hope to see you out there in the water, and as always, may God bless your fishing endeavors.